Damon Rourke had always prided himself on being a man of careful decisions. His reputation as a sharp trader in the outer reaches of the galaxy had earned him respect and a considerable fortune. His instincts for making profitable moves were nearly flawless. Yet, standing in the dimly lit auction house on Kepler Station, surrounded by an eclectic mix of alien beings, Damon couldn't help but feel out of place. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar spices, and something faintly reminiscent of stale alcohol lingered in the atmosphere. Holographic screens displayed the details of each item up for auction, flickering erratically above their respective lots. Damon adjusted his dark, reinforced cloak, ensuring that his expensive exosuit remained concealed. No need to flaunt his wealth in front of these opportunistic vultures. Next lot, 247, the auctioneer, a bulbous creature with multiple eyes, announced in a guttural voice. A key of unknown origin, found in the ancient ruins of the Zephyrian Belt. Damon's attention immediately snapped to the hologram. The key was beautiful in its simplicity, sleek and crystalline, with intricate shifting patterns that seemed to ripple across its surface like liquid starlight. His instincts, sharp from years of dealing in rare artifacts, screamed that this was no ordinary item. Opening bid, 10,000 credits, the auctioneer declared. Damon's hand shot up instantly. 20,000, he called, his voice firm. A nearby merchant, a sleek and slick Drazian with 3 eyes, countered with a quick 30,000. The bidding war began, but Damon held his ground. There was something about this key that he simply couldn't ignore. Sold to the human for 50,000 credits, the auctioneer announced after several heated moments. Damon made his way to the collection counter, his credit chip significantly lighter. He ran his fingers over the key. It hummed lightly in his palm, as if alive with some kind of energy. A staff member approached him with an odd, polite smile. "Please follow me to collect your full purchase." He frowned, sensing something unusual in the phrasing, but decided to comply. They led him down a hallway and into a back room. His heart skipped a beat. Standing there, bound in shimmering chains, was a woman, a stunning alien with deep forest green skin and long, midnight black hair. Her eyes were a piercing silver gray, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Damon froze. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. "The key unlocks her restraints," the staff member explained, his tone flat. "Congratulations on your acquisition." Damon's stomach twisted. He had just purchased a slave, something completely against his principles. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and inserted the key into her shackles. The chains fell away with a soft, melodic chime. "You're free," he said gruffly, looking away. "I made a mistake. I'm heading to a bar. Do what you want." He turned to leave, but heard soft footsteps following him. Pausing, he glanced back. "Why are you following me?" "Because you're the first person who's ever set me free," she replied, her voice melodic, carrying a gentle but otherworldly quality. The Red Nebula Bar was an unassuming dive, the kind that bore the marks of 100 different patrons looking to drown their sorrows. The lighting was a warm, amber glow, casting everything in a cozy, intimate hue. Damon slumped into a seat, his cloak spilling around him like ink and water. The alien woman, graceful as a leaf in the wind, took the seat next to him, drawing curious looks from the other customers. 2 galactic mists, Damon ordered from the bartender, a 4-armed creature with a thick accent. The drinks arrived shortly, glowing with bioluminescent particles that seemed to swirl like distant stars. The woman turned to Damon. "You don't have to stay with me," he muttered. "I freed you. You can go anywhere." "My name is Kaela," she said, ignoring his suggestion. Her voice had that same ethereal quality that drew him in from the moment they'd met. "And I choose to stay." Damon raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. He took a sip of his drink, the sweet and bitter flavors mixing in his mouth. "Fine, but I'm not good company. I just lost 50,000 credits on a key that turned out to be, well, a mistake." Kayla's lips curved slightly into a smile. "Actually, you may have gotten more than you bargained for." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "I'm an Orynyx, a species with natural empathic abilities. Not mind readers," she added quickly, noticing the confused look on Damon's face. But we can feel emotions, process them, and understand their patterns. It makes us excellent at negotiation and at entertaining. Damon raised an eyebrow. Is that why you were enslaved? Partially, she replied, her eyes darkening. My abilities make me valuable to certain people. But there's more to it. She traced the rim of her glass with a slender finger. My species also accelerates plant growth. One onyx can terraform an entire ecosystem in just a few decades. That's impressive, Damon admitted, his mind immediately starting to turn over the potential business opportunities. But it doesn't explain why you're sticking with me. Kaela met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. Because you're interesting. Most beings would have kept me as a tool to exploit my abilities. But you freed me, without hesitation, even at a great personal loss. Damon felt a strange warmth creep into his cheeks. Basic human decency isn't exactly fascinating, he muttered. Oh, but it is, Kaela said, her tone playful, especially when combined with your other qualities. Her eyes traveled over his features appraisingly. Strong moral compass, a successful trader, and, judging by your armor, quite capable in combat. And not to mention, she paused, her smile turning coy. Quite attractive by multiple species standards. Damon nearly choked on his drink, flustered. Are you flirting with me? Kaela smiled widely. I'm expressing interest in a potential mate. You've demonstrated both integrity and desirable traits. It's perfectly normal in my culture. I just freed you, Damon protested weakly, though he couldn't deny the attraction he felt. Isn't this all a bit sudden? Kaela shook her head. Onyx, don't waste time when we find someone we like. We're empaths, remember? I can sense your attraction, your integrity, your inner conflict. Why deny what we both feel? Damon took a long sip from his glass, trying to clear his mind. The alcohol buzzed pleasantly through his system, making her proximity feel even more intense. It's complicated, he said finally. I'm human. You're Onyx. We barely know each other, and you just got out of a bad situation. Kaela interrupted, her expression softening. Look, I'm not proposing marriage. I'm suggesting we explore this attraction. Unless your species has some cultural taboo about interspecies relationships. Damon laughed, surprised by her boldness. No, we're actually pretty open-minded about that. Kaela smiled. Then stop overthinking it. Her hand found his, her touch sending electric shivers up his arm. Let's start with another drink and some honest conversation, she said softly. I want to know more about the man who spent everything to free a stranger. Damon raised a hand to the bartender for another round. All right, he said, settling back. Honest conversation it is. But I've got questions too. Like how you ended up at that auction. Kaela's expression shifted, becoming more serious. It's not a pleasant story, she said quietly. But I trust you've seen enough of the galaxy to understand. The hours slipped by unnoticed as they talked. Damon, more and more captivated by her insight, and Kaela, finding herself drawn to his quiet strength and integrity. She told him of her capture by space pirates, the years spent being traded from one owner to another, and her resolve to retain her dignity despite everything. In return, Damon shared his experiences as a trader, his code of ethics, and his dream of someday owning his own fleet. As the bar began to empty, neither of them noticed. Their connection had deepened, and Damon found himself no longer focused on his lost credits, but on the woman beside him. You know, Kaela said softly, her voice intimate, I haven't felt this comfortable with anyone in a long time. Damon, taken aback, leaned in closer. Is that your empathic abilities talking? No, Kaela replied with a soft smile, tracing his jaw with her fingers. That's just me talking. With a final, lingering glance, she asked, would you like to continue this conversation somewhere more private? Damon didn't need any more encouragement. He stood, guiding her toward his quarters, where a whole new chapter of their story would begin. The room was modest but had a spectacular view of the nebula outside. Kaela placed her palm against the glass, mesmerized by the swirling colors of the cosmic lights. It's beautiful, she murmured, her voice soft as she turned to him. Damon nodded. Yes, it is. But as his gaze met hers, he admitted, I wasn't looking at the nebula. She smiled knowingly, stepping closer. I know, she whispered, her fingers tracing the outline of his chest. Your emotions are like a supernova. Bright, powerful, impossible to ignore. Chapter 2. Uncharted Territory. The next morning, Damon awoke with a foggy head and a heavy feeling in his chest. The bar had been a blur of laughter and deep conversation, but as the hours had worn on, so had the realization that he'd found something unexpected. He wasn't used to feeling this, connected to someone, especially not someone like Kaela. The sun, or whatever passed for daylight on Kepler Station, filtered weakly through the viewport in his quarters. The nebula outside had shifted into new hues, casting a gentle glow over the room. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the effects of the alcohol and the disorienting feelings swirling within him. Kaela was still asleep in the bed beside him, her emerald skin glowing softly in the dim light. The contrast of her vibrant beauty against the plain white sheets made it feel like he was sharing a bed with a living piece of art. He couldn't help but admire her peaceful expression, even as a nagging thought gnawed at the back of his mind. He'd freed her from slavery, but now what? Damon had spent most of his life navigating the fine line between profit and ethics, always careful, always controlled. He had never considered what might happen if a simple act of kindness turned into something more. Something complicated. As if sensing his internal conflict, Kaela stirred beside him. Her eyes fluttered open, silver-gray irises meeting his with a mixture of warmth and curiosity. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice still carrying that melodic quality, like a song that he couldn't quite place. Damon offered a small smile, though his mind was still tangled in thoughts. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," she replied, her hand reaching for his. "Thank you for last night, for everything." He didn't know what to say to that. What could he say? He had saved her, but in doing so, he had invited a lot more than he'd bargained for. "You don't have to thank me," he muttered, sitting up and running a hand through his messy hair. "I wasn't expecting any of this." He gestured vaguely between them, his discomfort rising. "I didn't exactly plan on spending the night with someone who had just been freed from captivity. And I certainly didn't plan on, well, this." She sat up beside him, the bed sheet falling loosely around her, her bare shoulders catching the light. "What do you mean by this?" Her voice was soft but inquisitive, her hand still resting on his. Damon glanced at her, torn between wanting to pull away from this strange, newfound bond and the undeniable pull she had on him. The way her presence seemed to calm his mind, the way her empathy eased the weight of his decisions, it was hard to ignore. "This," he repeated, his voice tight. "I didn't sign up to be anyone's savior or hero. You don't owe me anything. You're free now. You should do whatever you want." Kayla's eyes glistened, a flicker of something deeper in them as she leaned closer. "Damon, I'm not some charity case. You didn't save me because you felt sorry for me. You freed me because you saw me. Not as a slave, not as a tool, but as a person. And that means everything to me." His heart skipped a beat. Her words struck him in ways he hadn't anticipated. She wasn't looking at him with gratitude for a debt owed. She was looking at him like he mattered, like he had made a difference. Damon exhaled slowly, the weight of the conversation settling on him. He'd freed her, yes, but in doing so, he had opened up a whole new set of questions. Questions he didn't know how to answer. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought I was just buying a key, a damn artifact. I didn't think I was bidding on this." He gestured between them again, frustrated with himself for how complicated things had become. Kaela smiled gently, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "You didn't buy me. You freed me. There's a difference." He leaned into her touch for a moment, eyes closing as he let the warmth of her hand calm the storm in his mind. "You're right," he murmured. "But now what? You've been through hell. I can't just pretend everything is fine and easy because I did the right thing." Kayla's expression softened, and she shifted to sit more comfortably beside him. "You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes doing the right thing means just being there. And you've done that. But I also know that this, whatever it is between us, it's new territory for both of us. We don't have to rush into anything." She paused, her eyes meeting his with a knowing expression. But you don't need to run from it either. Damon nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to push away from this connection, this unexpected closeness. But another part of him found himself wanting to explore it despite the dangers it could bring. He reached for his communicator, his fingers brushing across the screen as he sent a quick message to his ship's AI. "Prepare the Dark Star for departure. We need to leave the station," he said, his voice steady. "I've got business to take care of, and we can't stay here much longer." Kaela tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "And where will we go?" Damon stood, his mind already moving on to the next plan, trying to push past the questions that lingered. "We're going to find answers. There's more to this key than I thought, and I'm not one to leave mysteries unsolved." Kaela stood beside him, her emerald skin glowing even more in the light, her presence as strong and captivating as ever. "Then let's go," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll face whatever comes next together." For the first time since they had met, Damon felt the knot of uncertainty loosen in his chest. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, he wasn't alone. Whatever the galaxy threw at him, he'd face it with Kaela by his side. As they left the quarters and made their way toward the docking bay, Damon couldn't help but wonder just how far this uncharted territory would take them. Chapter 3. The Dark Star Awaits. Damon's boots thudded heavily against the metallic floor of the station as he and Kaela walked toward the docking bay. Despite the previous night's chaos and confusion, his mind was already working through the details of his next move. The Dark Star's sleek, black starship waited for him on the lower levels of Kepler Station. He had business to attend to, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was brewing. Kaela walked beside him, her presence undeniable. She moved with an elegant grace, her emerald skin a stark contrast against the dull, industrial background of the station. Her gray-green eyes were always alert, scanning their surroundings, but her steps were relaxed, like someone who had found a strange kind of peace. It wasn't lost on Damon that her abilities were still somewhat of a mystery to him. What exactly did she mean by empath? She had given him a taste of it, sure, but there was so much more beneath the surface. Damon said, breaking the silence, "This whole empath thing, it's a little more than I bargained for." Kaela shot him a sideways glance, her lips curling slightly. "How so? Did I get under your skin?" Damon chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly. But if you're sensing everything I'm thinking, I might need to get a little more control over my emotions." Kaela's laugh was soft, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You'd be surprised how easy it is to mask things. With a little practice, I can't sense much at all." They passed a few bustling merchants, the occasional alien vendor selling their wares, but Damon kept his focus ahead. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed to find out what was really going on with that key. And what, exactly, had he walked into by freeing Kaela? The two arrived at the docking bay, where his ship loomed in the distance, its sleek black exterior a striking contrast against the bright lights of the station. The Dark Star had been his pride for years. Its quiet, deadly efficiency made it perfect for the type of work he did. Risky trade, black market deals, and occasionally some less-than-legal jobs when his back was against the wall. As they approached the ship, Kaela paused for a moment, her gaze turning to the sleek hull of the vessel. "Is this your ship?" Damon smiled, a mix of pride and uncertainty. "Yeah, the Dark Star. It's not much, but it's home." Kaela's eyes scanned the vessel with renewed interest, her hand brushing the surface of the ship as if she could feel the pulse of the machinery beneath her fingertips. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice distant for a moment. "I can sense the energy in it. Strong, but not unstable." Damon glanced at her, intrigued by the way her abilities seemed to perceive things he couldn't. "How can you tell that?" Her gaze met his, the gray-green depths of her eyes like an endless void, full of secrets. "Empathy isn't just about people," Kaela explained. "It's about the connections between all things. Machines, plants, even ships. I can feel the intent behind the design." They climbed aboard, the ship's hatch hissing as it opened. Inside, the Dark Star was a mix of utilitarian design and practical luxury. The cockpit sat in the front, the control panel illuminated with soft blue lights, while the central room had a small, functional galley and living quarters. Damon led Kaela to the cockpit, where he quickly settled into the pilot's seat, his fingers brushing over the controls. "We're headed to the outer rim," Damon said, his voice steady. "I've got a lead on the origin of that key. Something doesn't feel right about it. I need answers." Kaela settled into the co-pilot's seat beside him, her posture relaxed but alert. "I assume this means you're not just taking a vacation." Damon's fingers flew across the control panel as the ship hummed to life. "Definitely not a vacation. I don't do those. But there's more to this key than I realized. And I intend to find out who's behind it, and why they went through the trouble of hiding it." The Dark Star lifted off with a smooth, controlled rise, the station fading behind them as they broke free of the atmosphere. Damon punched in the coordinates for the outer rim, where a small, isolated research facility was rumored to hold the answers he was seeking. As the ship entered the dark void of space, the hum of the engines felt almost soothing. For a moment, Damon allowed himself to relax, but the unease still lingered at the edges of his mind. Kaela, however, seemed completely at ease, her eyes distant as she stared out the viewport, watching the stars streak past. "So," Damon began, "what exactly did you mean when you said you could terraform a planet? That's impressive, to say the least." Kayla's gaze shifted to him, her lips curving slightly. "It's not as dramatic as it sounds. Verdani can accelerate photosynthesis in plants, allowing us to make barren worlds fertile in a fraction of the time it would take most species. We've done it for centuries, terraforming small colonies and even entire planets. It's what we're known for." Damon raised an eyebrow. "That's incredible. No wonder they wanted you. Someone like you could change the course of entire worlds." She nodded, her expression darkening for a moment. "But that's not always a good thing. Not when the wrong people use our abilities for profit." Damon caught the bitterness in her voice, understanding the unspoken pain beneath it. "I get it. Power like that in the wrong hands can be dangerous." Kaela met his eyes, her expression softening. "You're not like the others, Damon. I can feel it. You didn't take me because you wanted something from me. You freed me because you felt it was the right thing to do." He looked away, focusing on the stars outside. "I'm not a saint," he muttered. "I've done plenty of things I'm not proud of. But when it comes to people being used like commodities, I draw the line." Kaela leaned back in her seat, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I believe you," she said quietly. "And that's what makes you different." Damon felt a warmth in his chest, but he pushed it down, focusing on the mission ahead. The key was still a mystery, and until he had the answers, nothing else mattered. As the Dark Star sailed further into the emptiness of space, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was about to change everything. For both of them, and that no matter where the key came from, they were headed straight into the heart of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. And Kaela? She was along for the ride, whether he was ready or not. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Dark. The Dark Star coasted through the vast emptiness of space, its sleek hull gliding smoothly against the backdrop of distant stars. The hum of the engines, now quiet and steady, was the only sound in the cockpit. Damon's fingers moved over the controls, his thoughts a swirl of questions, and his attention split between the flight path and the woman sitting beside him. Kaela hadn't said much since their departure. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the viewport, her expression unreadable. Damon had always prided himself on being able to read people. Traders needed that skill, but Kaela was different. She was a puzzle, and as much as he wanted to figure her out, there was something in her presence that kept him on edge. The ship's sensors beeped softly, pulling Damon's attention back to the controls. The coordinates for the research facility were set, but they weren't alone. A faint signal blinked on the screen, a small blip near the edge of their flight path. A ship was out there. "Got something," Damon muttered, adjusting the controls to get a better reading. "It's a small ship, barely a blip on the radar." Kayla's gaze snapped to him, her eyes sharpening with an intensity that startled him. She leaned forward, her voice low and calm. "Could it be one of them?" Damon's mind raced. "One of who?" Kaela hesitated for a moment before speaking. The people who were looking for the key. There are more than just pirates and slavers in this galaxy. Some people, corporations, shadow organizations, they'll stop at nothing to get their hands on something valuable. And that key, it's more than just a trinket. Damon's stomach tightened. He had known the key was special, but hearing Kaela's words brought a cold clarity to the situation. Whoever was after it wasn't just interested in ancient artifacts. They were after something much bigger. I don't have the luxury of ignoring it, Damon said, his voice clipped. He pulled the ship into a tighter orbit around the blip, preparing to take a closer look. We need to know who it is. Kaela nodded, her gaze distant once more, as if her senses were reaching out beyond the ship, beyond the stars. I can feel it, she murmured. There's something wrong about this. A presence in the dark. Damon frowned, but he didn't argue. He'd learned by now not to question Kaela's instincts. There was a depth to her perception that he couldn't fully grasp, but he wasn't about to ignore it. The small ship was coming into view now, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of space. It was sleek and unmarked, but the low-frequency signals emanating from it suggested it was an advanced vessel, well-equipped for covert operations. Whoever was inside, they didn't want to be found. Could be an ambush, Damon said, a warning edge creeping into his voice. Kaela didn't respond at first. Her expression had become unreadable again. Her eyes narrowed as she focused intently on the approaching vessel. I can sense them, she said quietly. There's fear, but also something else. They're not entirely human. Damon stiffened. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. What are you saying? She looked at him, her expression grim. Whoever they are, they're not ordinary mercenaries. They're more like hunters. And they're coming for us? Damon's grip tightened on the controls. He knew this was bad, but he hadn't expected it to escalate so quickly. He punched in evasive maneuvers, pushing the Dark Star into a sharp roll as the smaller ship adjusted its course to intercept them. Hold on, Damon said, his voice cool, even though his pulse was racing. The cockpit lights flickered briefly as the ship shuddered, the sudden lurch signaling that the smaller vessel had opened fire. The Dark Star jerked to the side as a burst of energy weapons skimmed past, narrowly missing them. Damon swore under his breath, recalibrating the shields. Shit, they're not giving us a choice, Damon growled, slamming the throttle forward. The Dark Star shot forward, its engines flaring to life as he tried to break away from the pursuing ship. We need to get out of here, Damon, Kaela said, her voice steady but urgent. She was already standing, moving toward the ship's weapon system. Stay in the cockpit, Damon ordered, his eyes flicking to the instruments. He punched in a series of evasive maneuvers, the ship twisting and turning through the black expanse of space. But it was clear that the pursuing vessel was faster, more agile. It wasn't just any ship. It was a hunter built for precision and pursuit. The ship's proximity alarm blared, and Damon cursed under his breath. They were too close. Damon! Kaela's voice was sharper now. She was at the weapons console, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. I can handle this. Let me fire back. Damon hesitated for a moment before he nodded. He knew they had little time. Fine. Just make sure you don't miss. Kaela's eyes flicked to him, her expression unreadable, before she focused on the incoming ship. Her hands danced over the console, and with a sudden surge of power, she fired back. The ship's weapons crackled to life, releasing pulses of energy that lashed out at their pursuer. The first shot missed, but the second one didn't. The energy beam struck the smaller vessel's rear thrusters, causing a violent explosion that sent it spiraling. But the enemy ship wasn't done yet. It pulled back, firing another round, this one aimed directly at their shields. We need to go faster, Damon muttered, his mind calculating escape routes. But the more he tried to outrun the enemy ship, the more he realized they were being boxed in. Then, the comm system beeped, a harsh, distorted voice crackling through. Human, you've interfered with something far beyond your understanding. The voice rasped, mechanical and cold. Surrender the key, and we may yet let you live. Damon's jaw tightened. So, they knew about the key. That wasn't a good sign. I'm not interested in bargaining, he said, his voice firm, but the adrenaline was pumping now. You want the key? You're gonna have to come through me? There was a brief silence. Then the voice spoke again, colder this time. You don't have the luxury of choice. But you will understand soon enough. You and your companion will wish you had handed it over. Before Damon could respond, a massive jolt rocked the ship, sending him slamming against the console. He grunted, quickly stabilizing the ship. What the hell was that? He hissed. Kaela's voice was grim as she checked the readouts. They've deployed mines. We're trapped. Damon cursed. They had no choice now. The enemy had them in their sights, and the clock was ticking. He glanced at Kaela, her face a mask of calm despite the chaos around them. We need to fight back, or we'll be sitting ducks, Damon said, determination setting in. Kaela met his gaze. I know, and I'm with you. Her voice was resolute, but there was an underlying tension. It was no longer just about the key. It was about survival. And whatever was coming next, Damon knew one thing for sure. The Dark Star was about to be tested like never before. Chapter 5, Last Stand. The tension in the cockpit was suffocating. Damon's mind raced as he worked the controls, trying to evade the relentless barrage of energy blasts from the pursuing ship. The warning lights were flashing, and the ship was shaking violently with every impact. But it was the sound of Kaela's calm voice that brought him back into focus. We have one chance to get out of here, she said, her tone cool despite the chaos. Damon's knuckles whitened as he gripped the controls. He knew she was right. The Dark Star had already taken too much damage, and if they kept running, they'd end up like sitting targets, unable to escape. They had to fight back. He glanced at Kaela, who was already monitoring the ship's energy reserves. The mines, Kaela continued, her eyes scanning the ship's data feeds. They're not just weapons. They're blocking our way out. We need to disable them. Damon's eyes narrowed as he thought through the options. The Dark Star wasn't equipped for this kind of fight. He'd been focused on getting to the research facility, not dealing with military-grade adversaries. But he wasn't going to die out here without trying. All right, he muttered. We'll need to get to their blind spot. We can't outrun them, but if we can use their own minds against them... Kaela nodded. I can help with that. I can feel the electromagnetic field around the mines. I can guide your shot. Damon's eyes flickered with realization. She was talking about her empathic abilities again, the same ones that had let her sense emotions and that sharp intuition she had about people. But this was different. She was using those abilities to sense energy, to feel her surroundings in a way that Damon couldn't even imagine. Let's do it, Damon said. He knew they were running out of time. He punched the ship into a sharp dive, pushing the Dark Star into a dangerous angle to dodge the incoming blasts. The ship groaned under the pressure, but Damon held steady. Kaela moved quickly, manipulating the ship's targeting system, her fingers flying over the console. You're in position, she said. Now, lock onto the mine closest to the enemy ship. Trust me, Damon. He didn't hesitate. The targeting system beeped, locking onto the first mine. Damon pulled the trigger, sending a concentrated pulse of energy directly at the mine. The blast hit its mark, and with a massive explosion, the mine detonated, taking a chunk out of the enemy ship's front shields. The pursuing vessel veered sharply to the side, attempting to evade the blast. But they were too late. The explosion triggered a chain reaction, causing several other mines to detonate in rapid succession. The enemy ship was rocked by the shockwave, its hull flashing with damage. That's it, Damon shouted, a grin breaking across his face. Now we push. He slammed the throttle forward, sending the Dark Star into a high-speed dive toward the gap in the enemy's defenses. The pursuing ship wasn't finished yet, though. It powered forward, trying to cut them off, but Damon had the advantage now. With Kaela guiding him, he had the edge on their movements. The Dark Star surged forward, weaving through the debris of the shattered mines and enemy fire. They were close. Too close, but Damon pushed the ship harder, forcing it into a narrow gap in the asteroid belt just ahead. We're almost clear, Damon said, sweat beading on his brow. Stay with me, Kaela. Kayla's hand was steady on the console, her eyes closed in concentration. Her lips moved in a silent chant, and the air around them seemed to hum with energy. We're going to make it, she whispered, as if she could already feel their escape. With a final burst of speed, The Dark Star rocketed into the safety of the asteroid field. The pursuing ship, unable to navigate the debris fast enough, slammed into one of the larger asteroids, its engines exploding in a violent burst of light. The Dark Star was free. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Damon let out a deep breath, his hands still gripping the controls, as if expecting the enemy to reappear at any moment. Kaela sat beside him, her gaze distant, her fingers tracing patterns on the console. Finally, Damon broke the silence. "We made it. We're alive." Kaela nodded, her expression unreadable. "For now." Damon turned to her, his voice softer now. "You knew it was going to be dangerous, didn't you? That's why you stayed. You knew what you were getting into." Kaela looked at him, her gray-green eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "I didn't know it would be like this, but I knew I couldn't let you face it alone. You freed me. I owe you more than I can explain." Damon's heart skipped a beat. The events of the past few hours had blurred his perception, but the weight of her words settled heavily on him. She wasn't just here because of the key. She was here because she had made a choice to stay, because she felt connected to him in a way that, despite everything, Damon couldn't ignore. "Well," Damon said, his voice low but sincere, "you've saved my ass more times than I can count today. I guess I'm just as stuck with you as you are with me." Kaela gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That's what I'm hoping for." Damon's heart gave another beat. He looked ahead at the asteroid field stretching out before them, the stars flickering like diamonds in the blackness. They were out of immediate danger, but there was still so much they didn't know. In the galaxy, it was still a dangerous place. He looked at her again, this time with more understanding. The key, the pirates, the mercenaries, it was all just the beginning. They weren't out of the woods yet. But for the first time, Damon felt like they might actually have a shot at this together. The Dark Star sped forward, its engines humming smoothly through the void. Whatever awaited them next, Damon knew they'd face it together. And whatever happened, he wouldn't let Kaela face it alone again.